17. Buddhist salvation. The Buddhist plan of salvation, or more accurately escape, is self-consciously or unconsciously a present factor in the mind of Western man. It is of importance, therefore, that it be analysed and understood. Its essential faith is this: all existence involves suffering. Suffering is caused by desire, especially the desire for continuance of existence. The suppression of desire, therefore, will lead to the extinction of suffering. In brief, the will to live must be suppressed so that man can be delivered. The evil for Buddhism is not sin, it is suffering, and because suffering arises from the desire to live, the will to live must be suppressed. It is important to know that Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, was a prince born into luxury. He lived in a civilization of considerable wealth and ease. Both his culture and Gautama the man held a pessimistic view of life, regarded the world as illusory or an illusion, and life as a burden to be escaped rather than as a gift to be enjoyed. Moreover, the most prominent fact in the life of Gautama Buddha was his overwhelming sense of self-pity because life involved the possibility of suffering. The idea that suffering and deprivation can exist at all was for him intolerable. Life and God had to be renounced for permitting or ordaining even a single cry of pain. Since the time of Rousseau, this same impulse has been very strong in Western man. A telling example of this is Fyodor Dostoevsky, who wrestled against this impulse to self-pity in himself and gives us some ugly portraits of its implication in his novels. This self-pity leads to existential fury against suffering, which is murderous. In Ivan Karamazov, Dostoevsky vividly portrayed this intense self-pity and absorption with suffering. Ivan cites case after case of monstrous examples of evil, especially against helpless children, in order to indict God and life. Ivan declares, quote, "Listen, I took the case of children only to make my case clearer. Of the other tears of humanity with which the earth is soaked from its crust to its centre, I will say nothing. I have narrowed my subject on purpose. I am a bug, and I recognize in all humility that I cannot understand why the world is arranged as it is. Men are themselves to blame, I suppose. They were given paradise, they wanted freedom, and stole fire from heaven, though they knew they would become unhappy. So there is no need to pity them. With my pitiful earthly Euclidean understanding, all I know is that there is suffering and that there are none guilty, that cause follows effect, simply and directly, that everything flows and finds its level, but that's only Euclidean nonsense. I know that, and I can't consent to live by it. What comfort it is to me that there are none guilty and that cause follows effect simply and directly, and that I know it. I must have justice or I will destroy myself. And not justice in some remote infinite time and space, but here on earth, and that I could see myself." End quote. In brief, the universe must meet Ivan's standard, because Ivan's autonomous mind reserves the right to pass the ultimate judgment on all things. There should be no suffering in Ivan's world, especially no suffering by any innocent person or child. Quote, "What do I care for a hell for oppressors? What good can hell do, since those children have already been tortured? And what becomes of harmony if there is hell? I don't want the mother to embrace the oppressor who threw her son to the dogs. She dare not forgive him. Let her forgive him for herself, if she will. Let her forgive the torturer for the immeasurable suffering of her mother's heart. But the sufferings of the tortured child she has no right to forgive. She dare not forgive the torturer, even if the child were to forgive him. And if that is so, if they dare not forgive, what becomes of harmony? Is there in the whole world a being who would have the right to forgive and could forgive? I don't want harmony. From love for humanity, I don't want it. I would rather be left with the unavenged suffering. I would rather remain with my unavenged suffering and unsatisfied indignation even if I were wrong. Besides, too high a price is asked for harmony. It's beyond our means to pay so much as to enter on it. And so I hasten to give back my entrance ticket, and if I am an honest man, I am bound to give it back as soon as possible. And that I am doing. It's not God that I don't accept, Alyosha, only I must respectfully return him the ticket." End quote. Ivan wants, ultimately, a universe of harmony, but only if there is total harmony all the way. He wants justice, but not hell. He wants no forgiveness of sins, because he refuses to allow sin and suffering to exist in the world, and because it exists, it is beyond forgiveness. Ivan's one real consideration is not the, quote, love of humanity, end quote, he professes, but behind the cloak of humility, a love of himself and an intense self-pity because he must suffer any indignity, evil, or just recompense. No man should ever experience suffering or frustration, and because these things exist, Ivan rejects God and turns in his quote-unquote ticket to heaven. It is a part of Ivan's inability to accept reality that he imagines that he has a, quote, ticket, end quote, to turn in. Ivan Karamazov is very much an expression of apostate Western man's humanistic mentality, and he is very much a Buddhist. Turning again to Buddhism, let us examine the implications of Srimad Kundan, quote, the holy drama of Tibet, end quote, a religious quote-unquote passion play of Buddhism. The great king and queen of Nepal rule over a vast realm with 60 kings subject to their power. The king has 500 wives and 1,500, quote, other comforters, end quote, to the king. A marvellous child is born, Srimad Kundan, who grows up to manifest remarkable wisdom and gives evidence of becoming a bodhisattva, a future Buddha, one on the way to perfect knowledge. Srimad Kundan vows one day that he will, quote, never refuse the wish of any living creature, end quote. This, of course, is really the kind of world that Ivan Karamazov was demanding from God. The consequences for Srimad Kundan's decision are devastating. His father's enemy asks for the surrender of an enchanted jewel which fulfills all wishes and desires. He is asked for his last morsel of food and gives it. He is asked for his children and he surrenders them, apparently without regard for their wishes. And he is asked for his eyes and submits to being blinded. Srimad Kundan goes through untold hardships of self-denial for many years as he struggles to become, quote, the blameless one who never asks anything for himself, end quote. After 11 years in the desert, he is tempted to return to Nepal. He answers, quote, if you wish to return, return. I will remain until the hour strikes 12. Thus I have sworn. I have to drink the chalice to the dregs. I have no fear of death. What is composed of parts will not endure. I shall not give away what I have wrought from countless incarnations. Were I to listen to the smallest selfish wish just now, the fruit of all I have endured, my righteous coming back to God, would be at once forfeited. The great adversary repents and returns the stolen jewel, and the Brahmin, who is used to gain the jewel from Srimad Kundan, kneels before him, now a blessed bodhisattva, saying, quote, you are the reborn Buddha, blessed be he yesterday, today, and in eternity. You are the way that leads all creatures to the eightfold pathway of redemption. You are the light that fills the world. You are the chariot that carries man from life to life. You are the sword that shall destroy the 6 transitional stages of existence and becoming. O thou, whose is the power and the glory and the kingdom, I worship thee. End quote. Srimad Kundan then gets back everything he lost, his eyes, children, and his princely rights, and he is then transported to Nirvana. This religious play tells us, in a religion without God, what man demands that God should be, one who, quote, never refuses the wish of any living creature, end quote, one who rights every wrong precisely as man would have it, and one, quote, who never asks anything for himself, end quote, but is a God entirely concerned with gratifying man. This is a consummate humanism and an intense self-pity, which demands that the whole of creation to be reordered in such a way that man is never hurt or offended. God must be remade in the image of man. This was, of course, a basic impetus of the Romantic movement of Rousseau and of the sentimental religion of pity he fostered. This belief was clearly stated in one of William Blake's Songs of Innocence, quote, "The divine image," end quote, quote, "To mercy, pity, peace and love all pray in their distress, and to these virtues of delight return their thankfulness. For mercy, pity, peace and love is God our Father dear, and mercy, pity, peace and love is man his child in care. For mercy has a human heart, pity a human face, and love the human form divine, and peace the human dress. Then every man of every clime that prays in his distress prays to the human form divine, love, mercy, pity, peace. And all must love the human form in heathen, Turk or Jew, where mercy, love and pity dwell, there God is dwelling too." End quote. Here is no sovereign God, but a God made after man's imagination in terms of man's self-pity and his self-pitying sense of need. Biblical terminology is invoked for an anti-biblical conclusion. Now, as in Buddha's day, humanism begins by declaring that man shall be his own God and ends in self-pity and a fear of life. The God of Scripture, however, makes it clear that not only is he the maker of heaven and earth and all things therein, but he also fully ordains all the terms and conditions of life. In Zechariah 10, 1-5, God declares why the Jews were suffering so grievously. Verse 2, "They had forsaken God for false gods, and as a result were in serious trouble. They were asked to pray to God, who controls nature totally, and he promised to send them rains to relieve their drought." Verse 1. God made clear his anger against the false shepherds of his people, and his principle of judgment is summarized thus by Moore, quote, "They who are first in crime will be first in punishment." End quote. God promises to deliver his repentant people with leaders from their own midst and to destroy their enemies. Verse 5. This deliverance, as well as the judgment, is entirely from God and his anointed, out of whom come all their leaders, their oppressors, and their deliverance. The ultimate and absolute determination of all things is in the hand of God. Man is responsible, and God is sovereign. The mystery of predestination is a great one, but the alternatives are monstrosities. When man retreats from that sovereign God in self-pity, he retreats from life and reality. Buddha's way has meant the centuries-old bondage of Asia and its inability to live with reality. It has meant the suicidal retreat of self-pity and the inability to function for lack of direction. A world in which no living creature is ever refused anything is a world of anarchy and ruin. Those who hunger for such a world are asking for death.